Hi guys, today I wanted to bring you 5 interesting and important terms that can help you if you're on a decluttering journey or have some plans to tackle clutter. Once you have an understanding of these 5 terms, decluttering gets just a little bit easier, so I hope that this video will be both helpful and interesting to you. I'm going to be talking about these 5 terms in relation to clutter, but in general they're just great terms to know because they apply to all kinds of different situations in life. Hi, my name is Mika and I own a professional organizing business. I'm also a writer and I'm currently writing a book series on how to have good vibes in your home. I'm currently working on the first book of the series, which is all about decluttering. And as I write, I share my content with you here on this channel. So getting right into it, the first term to understand is loss aversion. So loss aversion is where we feel the pain of a loss more than we feel the pleasure of a gain. And that's at about 2 times. So if we were to lose $20, we would feel the pain of that loss. And if we were to win $20, we'll feel the pleasure of that win. But the loss of losing $20 would irk us much more than if we were to win $20. And another example is this. If you were invited to a coin toss where if it lands on heads, you would win $100, but if it lands on tails, you would lose $100. Based on these rules, would you play? Most people at this point would say no. What if we change that winning amount to $125? What about $150? How about $200? It's at about that $200 mark that people will usually start joining in, and it's because losses psychologically and emotionally impact us more than equally sized gains. So now that the amount that we can win is about twice the amount that we could lose, we're more willing to take on that risk. So we're hardwired to avoid losses. And when we do let go of something, we feel sort of like a pain or a sense of loss. This is especially true when we let go of an item that we feel we haven't gotten full use out of, or where it seems like it would be wasteful to let go if there's still some life left in it. So even though you won't use the item and it's taking up precious storage space, and the thought keeps looping around in your mind that you should get rid of it, but you keep it. Why? Because it's slightly painful or you feel a sense of loss when you have to let it go. So rather than facing the pains and the feeling of loss and just letting something go, we end up keeping things. We would rather not face the pain of letting it go than to get the gains of letting it go. So now as we keep the item, it continues to take up space or we don't use it and we feel guilty every time we see it. So it's like a drain on our energy. We have to maintain it, we have to store it and move it aside every time that we're around it. Yet we prefer doing all that than to the pain of the loss because we're adverse to loss. But just by being aware of loss aversion, it can help us to more accurately assess the actual loss versus gain, which can lead us to making decisions that end up being more beneficial for us. So the next term is the endowment effect. So the endowment effect is an emotional bias, and it's where we tend to value what we own at a higher value just because we own it. So if I own a mug, and somebody else owns the same mug, it might be the exact same mug, but I would attribute a higher value to my mug just because it's mine. In terms of market value, it might be irrational, but in terms of being human, it's pretty normal. So this attributed value also increases significantly if there's a memory or a symbolism or significance associated with the item. Having a memory associated with the item can greatly increase the value of an item in our eyes. But at the same time, we don't have to attribute any kind of special memory or significance to an item for the value to increase. We perceive the value of an item to increase just because we own it. That's why sometimes, say if you go on eBay, there might be something selling for like $20, but you can often go and find a listing for the same thing for around $100. Just an example of a number, and that's usually a case of the endowment effect. So that's why whenever you list on a site like eBay, you should check the sold for price as much as you check for listed prices to get an accurate reflection of the going market value of an item. because you can list it for whatever you want, but what's the actual market value of what someone else is willing to pay for it? There's a popular study that was done at a university where a professor gave away brand new mugs to his students in half of his classes. Meanwhile, he gave nothing to the other students in his other half of his classes. Then he asked all of his students in all of his classes what they think the value of the mug may be. The students who received a mug valued it much higher than the students who didn't, almost 2 times as high. The professor also asked for the lowest price that the mug should sell for, and the students who owned the mug thought that the mug should sell for a higher price. The students attributed more value to their mugs just because they owned them. So the endowment effect comes into play when we know we don't need something, but because it's ours, we associate a higher value to it, and we don't really want to let go of it. Stores use this to get us to buy. So if we touch or hold something for long enough, we feel some sense of ownership for it. I worked in a jewelry store during college, and I remember my manager telling me that if someone holds a ring or a piece of jewelry for long enough, that they're more likely to value it for more and buy it. Just by a customer holding a piece of jewelry, it increases the chance of them buying. So as a sales tactic to get them to hold the jewelry or try it on. So if you go into a jewelry store or any other kind of store where they want you to touch or hold an item, this might be why. Customers are just more likely to buy an item after they've touched or held it. This holds true for fitting rooms, for clothing, for trying shoes on, and also for test driving cars. After you've touched or held something, the item seems to have more value. It's subtle and something that we're often not conscious of. Long return policies are actually not quite as risky because of the endowment effect. If an item is with you for long enough, you start to feel a sense of ownership over it. So therefore, more people are less likely to return it. You become emotionally attached and then also attribute value toward it because it feels like it's yours and it's harder to let go. So in a nutshell, we tend to overvalue what we own. And it's pretty much instantaneous. As soon as it's ours, we place a higher value on it. So this kind of does go hand in hand with loss aversion because once it's ours, it's valued higher and we do not want to lose it. We're adverse to losing something that's ours. And in terms of clutter, if we overvalue what we own, it's harder to let go of it. But just being aware of the endowment effect can help us declutter. The endowment effect, it doesn't come without a cost. By overvaluing some items, we tend to hold on to them for longer, but there is a cost because those items take up space, time, and energy to maintain them. And if we don't need the items, but we hold on to them, some of those items can become a weight on us. And the third term is clutter blindness. Clutter blindness is where you get used to seeing something so often that you just start tuning it out. We get so used to seeing things in a certain way that we stop seeing what would be obvious to somebody coming in and seeing it for the first time. So for example, if somebody comes in and sees your place with fresh eyes, they would see a lot that you might not. So what happens is we get used to seeing something and then we go on autopilot and we don't even notice it anymore. This takes a while for us to get desensitized to something. So if it's clutter, the clutter will still bother us. And I think that we still feel some sense of burden, but we become so accustomed to it that we just deal with it. We step around an area or we have a pile of things, but just expect them to be there and don't even see them anymore. Instead of our minds having a constant urgency about it, like action needs to be taken to clear this. Our brains automate the situation and we become desensitized and it becomes the new norm. This can apply to cleanliness too. Like say you're so used to having a stained countertop that you don't even see that it's stained anymore. So in terms of clutter blindness, we can still feel when something's off, it's just harder to pinpoint why. So you can feel it out by going to the area of your home that doesn't feel quite right, and then logically and mindfully pinpointing the cause. It's like a clutter blindness override. You can also take a picture, because sometimes if you take a 2D picture of your space, you can suddenly see a bunch of things that you hadn't seen before because you're used to seeing it in 3D. And as soon as it takes a 2D form, you see your space in a different perspective, and therefore you can see things with more clarity. So taking a picture is a great way to get around clutter blindness and see things with a fresh perspective. I think clutter blindness is also why we start to run out of storage space, because we put something somewhere in a storage area and that just becomes the norm. Then even though you don't love it, need it, or use it, it's there and you don't really think about it taking up the space anymore because you're so used to it being there. But even though clutter blindness, you can't see things sometimes, I feel like you can always feel it. So once you've tackled the clutter in your home, you don't have to worry about clutter blindness. So don't worry, because you'll be able to feel that it's right. And the fourth term is the sunk cost fallacy. The sunk cost fallacy is also called the Concord fallacy. It's when we have already invested into something, say our time, money, or energy, and now that time, energy, or money is gone and can't be recovered. So just because we've already invested so much, we might not even be interested in that thing anymore, and we might not even want to invest anything else. But we continue to invest, and we invest even more because we don't want to waste what we've already invested. Although, logically, you would think that as soon as we realize we don't want to do something anymore, we can just stop and then save our remaining resources so that we're not investing anymore, and that would be the smart thing to do. But still, we usually do end up investing even more and wasting more of our resources because we've already started that investment process. A great example of this is if you buy an expensive coat. As an example, say the coat cost you $300, random number. Say you like it, but you have no occasion to wear it. You have a small closet without that much space. It sits in your closet and you're unwilling to let go of it because you've already invested into it. You've already paid the $300 for it, so you're determined to wear it someday. So despite the additional costs of the space that it takes up, the cost to maintain it, the energy that you expend every time that you look at it and realize that someday you must wear it, it's still worth it to keep it in your closet and see it through. After all, you've already searched for it, you've tried it on, paid for it, $300 nonetheless, and then brought it home and have stored it for this long. So it's human nature to keep it until you can see it through and get some use out of it, because you've already invested so much that you'll continue to invest to see it through, because you don't want to waste the initial resources that you've invested into that item. Now, if you just put your foot down and say, hey, I made a mistake by paying $300 for this coat and storing it for so long I'm never actually going to wear it, I'll just let it go now. You'd save yourself the present and future costs of having to store it, take care of it, move it every time that you move, and that energy that you expend every time that you look at it. So there are present and future costs, but sometimes we'd rather see an investment through and waste even more resources, whether that be time, money, or energy, than foregoing and wasting previously invested resources. Anyway, rationally, what's done is done, and sometimes it's better to stop investing more resources into something that we don't even want. But cognitively, it's hard for us to do. It's hard if we've already invested a lot into something to give it up, even if we know that it might not be good for us. But once you are aware of the sunk cost fallacy, it's easier to see the rational side of the situation, which will help, and then you can reflect on whether you want to continue investing or not, knowing that the sunk cost fallacy exists. And the fifth term is the status quo bias. So the status quo bias is another emotional bias where we're more likely to leave things as they are. We generally have a preference to keep to the status quo. So this is subconscious, but if we're given two choices, one being our current circumstance and the other being a new circumstance, we feel more comfortable with the current circumstance and we're more likely to choose this default option. It's because it's easier, but it's also because it's less risky. Sometimes we have a fear of change because change comes with risk. So there's some loss aversion in this, and we have a preference to stay with our status quo. If we keep things as they are in our current circumstance and don't change anything, it's cognitively a safe bet. So with clutter, it's easy to let it stay put because you don't want to face the risk of a loss. The status quo of keeping the clutter despite its hindrances and the weight of it and the space that it takes up becomes the safer option according to the status quo bias. In some situations, the status quo bias can benefit us, but sometimes avoiding change can weigh us down and we can miss out on benefits and gains that we would get to experience if we just made the change instead of keeping to our current experience or the status quo. So these 5 terms might be instinctive and built into us as humans, but once we understand them, it becomes fairly easy to recognize and helps a lot when we're decluttering. Sometimes items might no longer have any value to you, but you don't notice that they're still around and taking up space because of clutter blindness. Or you might have a hard time letting go of them because of loss aversion, the endowment effect, or the sunk cost fallacy. But once you know these terms, it becomes just a little bit easier to part with those items that aren't adding value to your life, and you gain more freedom and space and energy and time. I hope that this video was helpful to you. If you enjoyed this video or found it informative, please hit the like button as it helps more people find my channel and I'd really appreciate it. Please subscribe if you'd like to see more content like this, and thank you so much for watching. See you in the next video.